For the Scenecore type beat, we want to set a faster tempo. In my case, I decided on 145 BPM. The first thing I did was lay down a simple kind of arpeggiated melody using Serum's default saw wave. After finding a nice melody, I changed the default saw wave to the phase warp setting found under the spectral category. To give it more atmosphere, I also applied some reverb and tweaked the knobs until I was happy with how it sounded. We are using this analog sounding synth to really capture the early sound of the internet, which consisted heavily of 8-bit or ringtone style synths. To fill out the space, I decided to use a soft string sound, which feels like a pad with lots of reverb. I also found this in Serum, and to process it further, I used a low cut EQ and a stereo spreader to clean it up and give it more width. I wanted to enhance the already existing ethereal vibe by laying down some chords using a choir preset I found in Tried Next Stream. Out of the box, it sounded too narrow for my taste, so I applied more reverb to help it fill more space. Afterwards, I noticed the choir was covering some high mid frequencies of the string sound, so I isolated the range where it wouldn't clash with other instruments. Next, it was time for a lead synth that fits the intentionally cheap sounding DIY attitude heard in Scenecore artists like 100 Gags. I found the perfect sound in Tried Next Stream called Real Cheap Brass. But after finding it, I struggled to come up with a good melody. By accident, I tried something new using the on-screen keyboard. Normally, you would play notes with the actual keyboard, but this time I switched to the other mode and played the melody with my mouse cursor. After experimenting, I came up with this melody. It sounds really cheap, and that's exactly what we want for this type of sound. To process it, I used the Shaperbox panning preset that gives the synth more stereo width. I'll definitely keep this second keyboard option in mind for future projects, since it was easy to use and gave fast results. To finish the intro section, I knew I wanted to use a synth bass to fill the super low frequency range. I made the simplest synth bass possible by using Serum's default saw wave pitched 2 octaves down. The only things I changed were increasing the unison from 1 to 2 and slightly decreasing the detune to fit the other instruments. Pattern wise, I made it stop playing occasionally to create a stop and go effect. And there it is, the simplest synth bass out there. Now, let's move on to the drop, which is introduced by a snare hit at the end of the previous 8 bars. Looking closer, you'll notice this isn't just a normal snare hit. It's actually several snares stacked together for a bigger impact. I pushed this impact further with a huge reverb from Valhalla Supermassive. I always return to the 80s space setting, which in my opinion is the perfect reverb. Before we get into the drums, let's talk about the lead synth that enters with the drop. It's another Tried Next Stream preset that already had big delay built in, which enhances the dreamy sound we are aiming for. It also sounds very analog, and by playing it in a higher octave, it feels like a fairy flying around my head singing sweet little melodies. Also notice how the number of instruments is reduced when the drop comes in. Specifically, we removed the cheap sounding lead, the choir and the synth bass, which I wanted to keep intro exclusive. The instrument replacing the synth bass in the drop is an 808 playing a simple pattern. I chose a lighter sounding 808 that fits better with the dreamy atmosphere. To process it, I used the filter inside Logic's quick sampler and turned up the drive knob. I think this is the closest Logic users can get to recreating the famous FL Studio boost knob. Let me know in the comments if you have another method. I'm curious if Logic users know another alternative. Now, let's get into the drums. I started the bounce with a simple hi-hat pattern, adding rolls here and there. Then, the clap comes in, but not in the usual way. This time, I moved the second clap hit slightly to the right, which adds an unusual bounce. This kind of clap pattern is common in a lot of drill music. Next, I added an accent snare to enhance the bounce, sprinkling in some triplet rolls. Speaking of that, I now think about the holy trinity of drums: clap, snare and hi-hat. Arguably, an open hat could also be added, but then my analogy wouldn't work anymore. Speaking of open hats, I also added one here, laying down a simple pattern that doesn't interfere with the other percussion elements. To process it, I added a stereo spreader to give it a wider appearance in the stereo field. To finish up the drum section, I added a crash that plays every 4 bars to help with transitions. In the next part of the drop, a kick comes in to support the 808. To make the impact as clean as possible, I sidechained the 808 to the kick. This makes the 808 duck for a moment every time the kick hits. A simple but effective trick to helping the kick cut through. Besides that, I added another instrument, a piano playing chords. I carved out the mid-range with EQ to prevent it from clashing with the bass. I also added reverb to blend it in and keep the dreamy scenecore vibe. Now that's it for the main section of the video, but I still want to talk about additional processing I did on the melody and master bus. To boost the high frequencies on the melody bus, I used fresh air to add sparkle, something this genre really thrives on. With some basic EQ removing unnecessary low end, we can keep the mix clean. To finish the melody processing, one of my all-time favorite comes in. OTT. This really brings the melody to another level, but make sure to pull the mix amount down a bit to prevent levels from getting out of hand. Now let's move on to the master chain. Before the soft clipper, I added an EQ to lift the highest frequency slightly. I like using a visual EQ on the master channel because it shows if there are imbalances in the mix. Make it easier to diagnose where consistency is missing and what can be improved. This EQ then feeds into a soft clipper with the clipping threshold set to -4.6 dB and saturation at 25%. With these settings, I feel we get a sweet spot of distortion that glues the track together and makes it harder. Don't be scared to exaggerate this soft clipper. Scenecore thrives on being over the top in every aspect. To finish everything, I added another instance of fresh air to really make the high end sparkle as much as you'd expect from a Scenecore type beat. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching and see you next time.